Often a band's identity is tied to a singer's voice. So what happens when that voice is changed? This video takes a look at 10 bands that changed singers, and it actually worked out.
It's a difficult transition to make. Fans feeling betrayed, the front face of a group now being completely different, new writing and presentation in the music. There's a lot of facets to factor in.
To help narrow down the list, I'm not including bands where a singer passed away, forcing a band to find someone new. This way, death is not the deciding reason, and this list won't be as morbid. Also, this is not a top 10, no ranking, just a list of bands who made a singer change happen and succeeded. You know how these videos work, let's get to it.
Probably one of the best examples of a lead singer change in rock and metal history is when the Prince of Darkness Ozzy Osbourne got the boot from Black Sabbath. As much identity that Ozzy had with Black Sabbath, it was something that needed to happen for all parties involved. According to Tony Iommi, we just couldn't continue with Ozzy. As much as everyone wanted us to, we just could not do it. Nothing was happening and it would have meant the end of the band. We didn't want to fire him, but we had to if we wanted to continue. So in 1979, Black Sabbath found gold with Ronnie James Dio. This would launch Dio as a classic rock and metal icon through heaven and hell and beyond. While other singers would be tried out over time after Dio would initially part ways in '82, it would be Dio and Ozzy alternating as the voice of Black Sabbath over the decades until Dio's passing in 2010. But even after replacing Ozzy originally, Black Sabbath rolled on and continued to be a powerhouse with many other lineup changes. I mean, a lot. But that's Black Sabbath and the band's legacy.
I still stand by that Dio Black Sabbath is quite underappreciated, even though Ozzy Black Sabbath is the most recognizable. Regardless, there's a lot of history here along with the music, and most of your favorite metal bands owe a ton to Black Sabbath and how the band was able to continue on.
Speaking of continuing on, the music world was shocked when David Lee Roth, one of the most charismatic frontmen in rock history, quit Van Halen in 1985 to pursue other ventures, along with many other reasons. It was chaotic to say the least, as the ego of Roth was the size of a mountain at that point, but Eddie and company would not be deterred, and Eddie Van Halen was introduced to recent solo artist Sammy Hagar, who both had the same mechanic. Not a joke. And after playing together, they smelled money. Van Hagar, as some people would refer to this era, would release 4 studio albums over 10 years, reach #1, and tour the world over, re-solidifying Van Halen. While this is not the only singer change in Van Halen's career, this was the initial shocking second generation of Van Halen that would continue the band as a staple of rock through the end of the 80s. As time went on, both David Lee Roth and Hagar would return as vocalists for Van Halen after a brief attempt with Gary Cherone, but behind it all was the Van Halen family up until Eddie's passing.
I am of the mindset that Van Halen proved they could continue on with a different singer, but Van Halen should not continue on without Eddie. It's mean to say that David Lee Roth was replaceable, but in terms of Van Halen, Eddie is not replaceable. No one is going to be able to replace Eddie.
One of the most positive examples of a singer change where all parties involved are happy is with Killswitch Engage. Rarely does anyone come out with big smiles and still loving each other like Killswitch had in these situations. From the band's inception to 2003, Jesse Leach was at the helm and singing on Killswitch's first 2 albums. After his departure, Howard Jones took over for almost a decade, covering 3 studio albums and continuing the success of the group. After Howard decided to peacefully part ways and do his own thing, Jesse came back to the group and has been singing with Killswitch since 2013. Howard is now the frontman of Light the Torch, and the bands often work together as well as completely support each other. There's zero animosity and everyone is happy. Jesse and Howard are friends, and both Killswitch and Light the Torch are rolling along just fine. Zero ego or complications. That is such a rare thing with bands that it's almost hard to believe. Killswitch Engage proved that a singer change can happen and the band continues to succeed, and then an additional change and revert to the original singer can also work well with no derailment.
It's impressive how well everyone has moved along with that family mentality between Killswitch Engage and Light the Torch. I still think this is a great example of a band actually making a singer transition work seamlessly, and it was the best possible outcome for everyone each time.
Going into symphonic metal, a band that has had big transitions with singers over the years and each time feeling like a big deal is with Nightwish. Going back to the late 90s, Tarja made a name for herself as a vocalist, and Nightwish became a force to be reckoned with in metal that took Europe by storm, and as the years went on, international success would follow. In 2004, Tarja was then dismissed from Nightwish in a big shock that she says she was not expecting. After a hiatus, Nightwish would return with Annette Olsen as the female vocalist pairing with Marco on the male singing. Nightwish would continue to surge after massive albums Dark Passion Play and Imaginarium came out. Then in 2012, Olsen was dismissed in a bit of conflicting reasons, where the remaining members of Nightwish said it was due to creative differences, while Olsen said it was due to her falling ill and becoming pregnant, leading to the band finding replacement singers without Olsen's input. This is how Floor Jansen would be found and eventually be the permanent replacement for Nightwish starting in 2013, and is still active today with the group, even though other major lineup changes have happened with the symphonic metal headliners. Nightwish's most recent album, Human Nature, coming out back in 2020.
Nightwish has a lot of history behind their lineup changes, especially when it comes to the vocalists Tarja, Annette, and Fleur. Not all of it's pretty, but it's undeniable that Nightwish has stayed a force in metal over decades, and every time they change singers, it's shocking, but the music presented does not fail.
Speaking of metal in Europe, Arch Enemy has also seen its fair share of change-ups. Going back into the 90s where guitarist Michael Amott formed a supergroup, Arch Enemy was originally fronted by Johan Leva of Carcass fame. After 3 studio albums, Leva left the group in the year 2000 and the band shifted gears, picking up Angela Gasso. This would expand Arch Enemy's style and gain more followers in Europe for well over a decade as the band would release 6 albums. Then in 2014, Angela stepped down peacefully, saying it was her time to move on, pursue other ventures, and focus on family. She would help manage the band for a while and gave her blessing for Alyssa White-Gluz to take the microphone. Since 2015, Alyssa and a consistent lineup in Arch Enemy, including the extremely talented Jeff Loomis, have released 2 studio albums and will most likely be touring as soon as the world opens back up, along with many other bands. For a group started as a piecemeal supergroup in the 90s, Arch Enemy is still blasting through and performing the world over with a fierce vocalist and killer guitar work.
Arch Enemy has become a polarizing group from metal elitists and fans, but in my mind, you can't argue the success that the band has had over decades, regardless of who is at the microphone. Arch Enemy has played with every legendary act and enormous European festival you can imagine.
A singer change that has always stood out in my mind is the #1 rock song Churning Machines' 3 Days Grace. For years, Adam Gantier's unique voice helped carry the Canadian-based band through gold and platinum certifications as well as big tours through 4 studio albums. Then in 2013, to many people's surprise, including band members, Adam left the group saying he wanted to move on and explore other ventures. This was only a few months after the band's album Transit of Venus dropped and right before a big tour with Shinedown was about to happen. It was an abrupt departure for sure, but fortunately for 3 Days Grace, Brad Walsh had a brother Matt who was singing for the smut rock group My Darkest Days, who would then take over full-time for 3 Days Grace. Matt has been the voice of the group since 2013, and together the lineup has been consistent with additional albums and big tours following. While I prefer Adam's recognizable voice with the older 3 Days Grace songs, Matt has done just fine carrying that torch, and the band is still getting radio play everywhere.
I remember being at a festival in 2013 when 3 Days Grace was playing only 2 months after Adam left and Matt took over, and many people in attendance did not know what had happened. At one point, someone looked on stage and loudly shouted, "That's not Adam!" It was pretty funny, but this stuff does happen, and 3 Days Grace made it work.
Let's talk about one of the big 4. Anthrax has had quite the history going back to the 80s, and regarding who was singing during which time period, Joey Belladonna has been the most consistent and the most well-known for being the front of the Thrashers. Belladonna has the most albums as vocalist under the Anthrax banner through the 80s and early 90s, and then again in the 2010s. Behind him is John Bush, who released 4 albums through 10 years between 93 and 2003. After Bush left in 2003, several attempts to find a new singer were made before Joey Belladonna returned full-time and has been riding strong with Scott Ian ever since. While 90s Anthrax is not that celebrated, as the others from the Big 4 are not really in the 90s as well, I do feel John Bush was not bad at what he did. And although Anthrax doesn't always get the credit they deserve, especially as one of the Big 4, the band has definitely succeeded over the years and been a staple of metal at festivals and big tours over 30 years now, and undoubtedly will continue in the future.
Anthrax are still fun live, and the band said they have a new album ready when touring can pick up again. I've seen the group live many times and enjoyed the band's 2017 album For All Kings, so they still have it. They are going strong after many years, changes, surviving the 90s. I mean, what more could you ask for?
Now with the extreme side of music, Cannibal Corpse was becoming a massive deal in the early 90s subculture, and through all the controversy and disgusting lyrics, the band has continued on after a big singer change. Chris Barnes has an iconic growl. His voice is instantly recognizable. Then in 95, Barnes was out of the band after personal differences with everyone. This was an extreme band with a unique sound. How do you replace someone like that? You get a bigger monster with a crazy voice. Enter George Corpse Grinder Fisher, one of of the nicest guys in metal who looks like he could single-handedly destroy a village. With Corpsegrinder on the mic, Cannibal Corpse would go on to release 11 studio albums, including Violence Unimagined, which just came out this year. Cannibal Corpse would also go on to be banned in several countries for being too violent, suggestive, and vulgar. That's how you know you're doing something right. Meanwhile, Barnes has been chugging along with 6 Feet Under and trying to pay tribute to bands with graveyard classics.
Cannibal Corpse's most recent album is solid, thrashy style of death metal. The story of Corpsegrinder also doing an interview about donating stuffed animals to charity is adorable. I appreciate him as he screams some sinister, grotesque things from the Cannibal Corpse discography.
One of the more famous singer changes in history, and in my opinion, one of the most important. Iron Maiden's inception in the late 70s went through several singers before finally working with Paul Di'Anno on the band's first 2 studio albums. It wasn't until after the band would release Paul and Fine Gold with Bruce Dickinson that Iron Maiden would become a phenomenon. Make no bones about it, Iron Maiden would not be the act it's held as today without Bruce. I just don't see it happening. The Number of the Beast and Seventh Son of a Seventh Son would not have had the same effect without his voice. In the 90s, when Bruce left for a few years and Blaze Bayley took over, it was instantly noticeable how much of a change there was for the sound and presentation. In 1999, when Bruce came back, Iron Maiden was back on track and would continue for another 20 plus years, releasing studio and live albums to their heart's content. No disrespect to Blaze, no disrespect to Paul, but Bruce Dickinson is the voice of Iron Maiden. It's just one man's opinion, but there is no substitution for someone like Dickinson.
It's also my opinion that Iron Maiden should have been put into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame many years ago. Every year they're nominated, but nothing happens. I hope this section of the video becomes dated very quickly and the band gets rightfully put in their place in Ohio. Because the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Ohio for some reason. Before we get to the final entry, please hit the like button below if you've been enjoying this video. It helps a ton to get this video pushed to non-subscribers. Thank you. Alright, time to get a little sad for a second.
Ending with one that is undeniably tragic but monumental, Pink Floyd, a household name, would not have become the massive music phenomenon around the world through generations if the band would have tried to stay with Syd Barrett through his declining health. When David Gilmour was brought into the fold and then took over main singing duties along with Roger Waters, Pink Floyd was able to focus on the creativity and massive works of their amazing albums instead of how Syd was doing. When you look at the timeline of Pink Floyd going back to the 60s, it really is amazing how much time-testing music there were able to create through so much heartbreak and inner turmoil, including the early stages. I made a video a few months back on one of my favorite albums, Wish You Were Here, regarding some of this, and as unfortunate as it is, I can't stress enough that Pink Floyd had to move on without Syd. We would not have gotten albums like Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall, with Syd's deteriorating state being a present factor while the band was still trying to work.
When you listen to Wish You Were Here and think about Syd, it's sad but also great that the band remembered their friend who was responsible in helping Pink Floyd start in the first place. Check out my video on Wish You Were Here in the YouTube card and video description below.
I'll leave this question for you. What's another band that changed singers successfully? Leave a comment and let everyone know. Big thanks to my patrons and a special thanks to Brandon Barrettfeld, Chris Doman, McKenna White, and Dom Noble. You can have a say in upcoming videos and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon. Click the link in the video description for more information on helping the channel. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified on upcoming videos. You can check out my concert photography on Instagram, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook and Twitter.